help me with this your signal cable. More tap internet from there. Come here. Yeah. No be here. See there. You see the other boot. Una go see the way they take plug this one. You get and then another one in the work.
now it's kind of like it's going to happen. So we're thankful about the African Microbiome Day scheduled for the 19th of September, 2022. The idea of this is to showcase human microbiome research efforts on the continent, to facilitate avenues for potential collaboration and growth, and depending on the response we get, to make this an annual event. So this is something that is actively in the works, and hopefully we'll be able to send out more information in this regard in the next few months. Something else we've actually been working on a while, is still very much a work in progress, is a collaborative African microbiome project. So we're working on a proposal at the moment, and I want to just use the opportunity to thank all the PIs we've approached and that have been very supportive and willing to collaborate on this project. And an ongoing project that, well, a long-standing project we had that is thankfully now completed as well, is the metadata template. This template, the idea of the template resulted from a project that's going on, a H3Bionic project, where they were working on putting together an African human microbiome portal, which is ideally to serve as a one-stop place for all African human-related data set, microbiome data set. So while we're putting this together, we realized that it was quite difficult to actually, be consistent in our data collection. So we came up with the idea of actually having a template that will make it easy, not just for African microbiome data collection, but also for future data, metadata analysis. Next slide, please. So the next thing we talked about really was sustainability, and this was pretty key for us because we realized that the funding for H3Africa is coming to an end, but it has been a very, very beneficial task force. I mean, albeit quite a young task force. Thank you.
Ask for.
Thank you. Okay, so do I turn this on? Okay, can you hear me? Oh, it's not working. Okay, no, that's fine then. So in terms of sustainability, we actually deliberated quite a bit on this and realized that collaboration is going to be key going forward, not just within H3Africa projects, but also outside the H3Africa projects. Even though the task force did start with the intention of bringing together H3Africa projects, we believe that we are at a point where, still very young though, but we would like to extend it to other projects across the continent working on African microbiome research. Okay. So, so in order for this to happen, we did decide that we'd actually need projects to actually dedicate some members that are interested in microbiome research to the task force to help us actually make this an ongoing, to keep this going. And as a task force, we need to actually make training activities that are attractive to actually draw people to the task force to keep it going as well. And also to make people realize that the task force, yes, it was started during the H3Africa funding, but it is open to everybody. That's an awareness that I realized that people actually believe that this is just an H3Africa thing. But yes, it started that way, but the idea is to make it an African-wide thing. So I'm hoping we can get the word out for this to actually happen. And finally, I think something as well to actually get people focused on some projects is to have actionable timelines so people can actually know how to dedicate their time as well. So in terms of sustainability, that's what we have. So moving right along. Could you please go ahead and change the slides? I can't seem to get it to move out there. Okay, thanks. Thank you. So in terms of moving forward, it's a three-year, the lifespan of the task force has been just about 3 years, but in that time, like I said, we did come up with a template that is going to be readily available actually in collaboration with the Phenotype Harmonization and Standardization Working Group. Thanks to Lyndon and Catherine and all the folks out there and helping to put ideas to life as well. So this is going to be available with the rest of the standardized templates we have as a resource on the H3Bionic webpage and also on the webpage of the upcoming African Human Microbiome Portal page. We've also been able to, in the 3 years, have biannual webinars with experts in the field to build capacity, because that is one of the things we did set out to do as a task force. And then as well, we really do think that this upcoming African Microbiome Day is a thing that is going to last a while. So we're quite excited about that as well. In terms of plans for the next year leadership, we're quite keen on continuing with the task force, and we'll be continuing with our regular meetings and activities as much as possible. And we did appoint a new co-chair today for the task force, Emmanuel Ali, and I'll continue as the chair. I'll roll to being the chair of the task force. Upcoming publications. We have nothing at this moment, but we're actively working on just putting together a manuscript based on the metadata template and the experience in putting that together. And I think that's it. With that, I just want to say thank you to the participants today and just that have always participated with us during the meetings. And potential future members in advance. And also to funders. I think that was the next thing that was going to come up, but it's not coming up at this point. Thank you very much.
I was going to have questions for people who are listening, potentially here, but we won't have time for them. Those questions should be logged, and if there are questions, we can respond to them later. So our next presenter is Michelle Ramsey for Cardiovascular.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yes, great. So hello everybody, my name is Michelle Ramsey. I'm currently the chair of the CVD working group, and I'm going to give you a very brief presentation on the work that has been done under the umbrella of the CVD working group. So I'm hoping we'll have some slides soon. So we first of all answered the question, why do we have a CVD working group? And the reason is that we want to work collaboratively across multiple PI groups to do more than we can as individuals. So that was really the whole idea of forming this group. And so you can go straight on to the next slide. So what we really want to do is to investigate genomic and environmental determinants of and influences on cardiovascular disease amongst sub-Saharan Africans. So our objectives are to harmonize data across these different groups, to merge the data into a separate REDCap database that can be used by everybody who's a partner here, and then to share the data for joint analysis. So you can go on to the next slide and the one after. How are we doing? I'm not sure who's regulating them, who I should be looking at. This side. Okay. So you can just do the next one, which is just showing the different groups that are involved as part of the CVD working group. And what you can see is that all these projects have different prime questions, some related to stroke, to diabetes, to rheumatic heart disease, and so on, but they all have collected data that is in common. And that is why we can now do analyses that cut across all of these. So in the next slide is just the achievements over the last probably 6 years or so. And so I think one of the greatest achievements is that we've been able to work together as a group. I think that has really sort of been an amazing opportunity and has sort of helped us do a lot of things. So one is developing the chair resource that I'll talk about, then our joint publications, then successful grant applications that have actually come out of this working group. So you can see the group that was there this morning, and then online we had Catherine and Onoja joining us, as well as Julie Makani, but I didn't have a photo from her. So you can just go straight on to the next slide. And so this is really this joint resource that we've created called CHAIR. And you can see what CHAIR stands for, that it is the Cardiovascular H3Africa innovation resource. So it's precisely to do that, to innovate using this. And this initiative has been led by 3 of our young scientists. You can see their names there. And at the moment, we still have challenges in terms of uploading the data from the different groups into the REDCap database. And part of it is the harmonization, but it's also the process. Like even once we decide how we're going to harmonize the data, actioning that is not trivial. So you can see the progress, and we've decided now that we need a data jamboree where we're going to get all the data people together to kind of just really push to get the data into this resource now. So just thank you to Catherine and Mamana from H3Africa. Shows you the publications that have come out. So essentially we've had 4 joint publications, but we also had an issue in Cardiovascular Journal of Africa in March, April of 2015, where a number of the individual groups actually published on their work. So I think, quite a lot of things happening, but since our last publication was 2020, it's time we produced another. So we are thinking applied for, and Mayoa's group, and then we had 4 supplements, and Ken Wiley was really involved with helping us get those supplements to each do different things. And we're still busy with the work of those supplements and hope that they will result in papers in the next year or so. And then very importantly, the success in obtaining the Cardinal Grant, which includes not only H3Africa, but also external partners, and some of them in the room here. So that will be an opportunity to look at polygenic risk scores across multiple different populations. So the last slide, I think, is just talking about the projects that we're working on at the moment. This may interest you that the group is still very active. So I've listed 6 of them here, and I've shown again that we are beginning to see leadership of our younger participants. So you can see there Onoja, Tinashe, Timothy, and Pawende all leading a study on their own using some of this data that cuts across all these different studies. So the very last slide is just where are we going? And I think you can see that we have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, the Coordinating Centre has agreed to support us for at least another year while we figure out what we want to do beyond what we're doing now. Thank you very much, Philip.
So participants consented for follow-up. So
I think most of the groups have done that, but again, we would have to check with each of the individual groups.
Okay, great, thank you. So our next presenter will be from Environmental Health. Try to get your slides.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, this is the Environmental Health Working Group, and Mark Nickel is actually the chair of this group, but he couldn't make it, so I'm presenting on his behalf. Next slide. And so I think everybody knows that H3Africa was originally designed to think about the genomics in these African cohorts, but there's a lot of interesting and rich environmental data that a lot of these populations had as well. And so the purpose of this working group was really to increase the awareness of environmental health and gene environment research in Africa, and try to enable a lot of collaborations and knowledge sharing across a lot of the projects, and then explore funding opportunities to continue to think about environmental and G/E research with different health outcomes. Next slide. And so some of our achievements are, we started this working group around 2017, and we had this environmental health workshop in Rwanda in 2018. And at that workshop, we really tried to explore a lot of different exposures that are relevant to the African continent. And we had lots of presentations about examples of nice studies that had been done in Africa related to GBIE or environmental research. And we wrote a workshop report that came out in 2019. It was kind of a summary of that workshop. And then after that, over the last couple of years, we've hosted a number of webinars that have been sort of education-based about different approaches related to how would you incorporate different environmental exposures into your studies. Can you go back? Yeah, and then we have facilitated a lot of proposals that have come into here, which is the Human Health Exposure Analysis resource, and I'll mention that a little bit in the next couple slides. We've also facilitated a lot of unassisted NIHS grant applications, and then also just a lot of integration of different environmental exposures into existing H3Africa projects. Okay, next slide. So this morning, we actually went through and had quite a few different individuals actually talk about some of those projects where environmental exposure has been now integrated into different H3Africa projects. So Vincent talked about the Kidney Disease Research Network and how, in addition to the APOL1 gene variant, it looks like there's a number of different environmental exposures that really impact who gets that disease. And so they're exploring a number of those different exposures for that. Godfrey talked about in the Abuja project how they have actually incorporated some particular questions into their questionnaire related to environmental exposures. So that's been nice. Mergen is part of the REMAC group, and they're looking at respiratory microbiome and ambient air pollution, especially PM 2.5. And he talked a little bit about how they're incorporating that. They actually are hoping to have here measure some pHs and some other exposures. And then Rogers talked about some of the work in the integrated Uganda Biorepository, where they're doing HPLC training and methodology, and they're getting the equipment and they're doing the training to be able to measure a wide variety of environmental chemicals and toxicants at that biorepository. So I think that that will be a really nice resource for really all of Africa going forward. Okay, next slide. And then we did have this special guest, Musa Kana, who is not actually part of H3Africa, but we're really happy that he was able to come to H3Africa and able to come to this working group this morning. He's a fellow, and he is hoping to start a new cohort, a new birth cohort that's really exploring a wide variety of different environmental exposures that might be related to childhood stunting. And he shared with us this morning some feasibility studies related to that. And next slide. I did want to mention just briefly here, which is this NIHS resource. It's a 5 or 6 different labs that really have a lot of expertise in measuring a wide variety of different environmental chemicals and toxicants. And so this is available to all H3Africa projects with NIH funding to add or expand different exposures using existing samples. And there is an application related to that, but it's not quite as cumbersome as a full-blown NIH application. And the nice part about it is free, besides just having the samples shipped to one of those labs. If you get a successful HERE application in, it is free. So it is a really nice resource to be able to add different environmental exposures to your projects. We have a number of projects. Heather Czar and Mark Nickel have a HERE application now, and they're in the process of getting their samples analyzed. And we have several other projects that are pending or in the works for H3Africa projects. Okay, next slide. And then I just wanted to mention that we have been facilitating and talking to a lot of the investigators about unsolicited grant applications, especially R21 and R01 applications to NIEHS, and this is our contact information. So we're happy to talk to anybody that's interested in adding any component of environmental exposures to the studies. And next slide, that might be it. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Kim. Moving into our next session is rare disease. Emily and Judith.
Load my slides as well, please. My laptop doesn't really connect. Thanks. While we are waiting for the laptop to load, so I'm going to be representing, giving feedback of H3A's rare disease work group. Eme Lumaka is the chair of the work group, and I co-chair the work group. You can contact Eme directly from the H3A site, so I'll put my contact details there. Next slide, please. So we had a very interactive productive session this morning, basically going through sort of history, what we have done, what is our main aim, and what we have achieved, what our main achievements so far have been, and what we need to know, where we need to crystallize some of our activity and take it further. And our main focus overall had been on sustainability, and there are many other aspects, including trainings that we have offered, genome analysis of rare disease work group, rare diseases, that was jointly done with CleanGen and Gregor team, as well as we are also leveraging other ongoing rare disease trainings that are offered globally, and by sharing that detail, how to get involved and to redeem registration cost, etc. One of the feedback we have received is regarding training and capacity development, that we could do more, not only from the technical side, but also to from clinical geneticist, for example, is a number where we could increase in Africa for diagnosis. And in terms of collaboration, that's one of the our aims to proliferate this knowledge and also try and harness where there is demand and how we can actually translate what we find through collaboration, through research, as well as implement these aspects. In terms of policy, so it's an all-round aspect. In this regard, we have invited IHOPE, and also we work very closely with G2MC and other organizations, and not only gaining insight and applying for potential grants. So there are many PIs within our work group collaborate in grant writing and conveying information regarding the status quo and what capacity we have in Africa, what is needed. And in terms of resources that we have a white paper that is ready. In fact, it's being submitted, reviewed, and being hopefully we should hear back, and which is going to be serving as sort of a stepping stone for us to write potential new grants, stating that what resources that Africa needs in terms of diagnosing, treating, and implementing policy, etc., for towards working towards sustainability. So the main topic throughout the day, I would say, have been about sustainability or relating to sustainability. So this is mainly African data is underrepresented both in terms of genotypes and phenotypes. There are solutions that are available for quick AAC diagnosis like FISTogene, which for example does not work on African population. So one of the aspects that we could do after our article is published is to write a grant proposal. This is to summarize various views from members who attended the work group this morning, work group meeting, which was well attended. In fact, we had about 4 or 5 times more number of people attended this work group compared to a couple of years ago when we had our last face-to-face meeting. So the grant proposals generally is to a platform that to support genetic and phenotypic data service as well as patient and parents support groups. And there were very useful examples that were highlighted by clinicians who work in this field. Some of them require next slide, please. Some of them require more sort of immediate solution, short-term solutions, and some of them require, we are looking at the longer term solutions. In terms of shorter term, so, one slide is missing, I think. If you could go back, thanks. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, one slide is missing. So in terms of shorter term is that what we can do with the existing resources, not just in Africa, but internationally, to support patients and parents group, where we can direct them to get immediate relief, for example, instead of having to wait for our resources to become available. And in the longer term, to provide a solution, something like matchmaker.com, that enables people to find, in terms of querying and finding out if this variant is, which disease is caused in terms of diagnosis, and also what treatment is available and where these patients are, and to connect with parents and patient support groups. And with that, I want to finish off by acknowledging many people who are behind the scenes, especially to thank Rolanda, who has been really active and supporting all the works that we are doing. I also want to quickly mention that I had forgotten completely and forgotten many things. I was waiting for some slides to come in last minute. We done a survey to extract information that's going to be potentially going to the grant proposal is to understand the genomic service landscape in Africa, which technology and service provider offering rare disease diagnosis, for example. So that survey is still active. I'm told today that the link is available on the H3A website. And if you are interested, please do contact me, and we want to hear from you if you are in that field and have some resources or concern that you would like to contribute to the survey. Thank you very much. Any questions, please?
Great. Thank you, Judith. I think we're going to have questions at the end. So great presentation. Our next presentation is Outreach and Communications, Michelle Skelton.
Thank you. Wait for my slides. I think I can leave that to you, Judith. Keeping you in suspense. Thanks so much. So I'll be giving an update on what the Outreach and Communications Working Group has been doing and what we discussed today. So since March 2020, we have been meeting regularly and, having various webinars and various activities as well. So just to go to the next slide to rehash the objectives. Next slide, please.
So the role of the outreach group was really to showcase the consortium, as well as the research from the various research and projects, also to promote various events and publications. We also work to support sustainability of the capacity building activities, and supported media and public engagement. And next slide, please. And we did this through a number of activities. Of course, as I said, meeting monthly. We met regularly throughout the pandemic. And of course, this was a team effort. We had a group of people really dedicated, like Babalo, Farina, Shumi, and Confidence, and using obviously various mediums to our activities, like the website and the social media accounts. The YouTube channel grew with a library of videos from various projects, from the biorepositories, and explaining various activities that the groups were doing, like F-Genera. They had the feedback of findings, videos that they also shared on the YouTube channel. So that was very useful, as well as, of course, the H3Africa documentary, which we are updating here at the consortium meeting. And of course, we had a number of branding materials and training materials, as well as, of course, the webinars on the YouTube channels. We also attended events when we had the opportunity face-to-face, like the Science Forum, which took place in South Africa, one of the biggest Science Forum meetings in Africa, actually. And yes, we also developed reports and updates. So I just wanted to go back to the previous meeting. The next slide, please. In the 18th meeting, which was around September 2021, various topics came up there around focus on media monitoring, for instance, and also science communication. We had various discussions on how to do a press release to support scientists, what were the guidelines for a press release, science communication. We had various speakers, of course, on that. And another topic came up, which started actually out of the outreach group around how to communicate our research in a mindful and culturally sensitive manner. But this then developed into what happened earlier today, the population descriptors in genomic research workshop, which was, I think, a really good success, and you'll hear about that a bit later. So today's agenda, can we just go to that? Thanks. So we had a number of guests. We first had Jive Media talking to us about how we may use film for science communication. And they're quite a dynamic group based in South Africa, but I'll go to the next slide. And we also had one of the PhD students from the F-Genera group, Chengli, and he also developed a documentary, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Babala also updated us on the good and bad of social media, and I'll talk about that also. Sorry, thanks. And we also discussed the descriptors workshop in brief. The next slide, please. Oh, perfect. So. So this was Jive Media. Robert Inglis joined us from South Africa today to discuss with us how to use film for science communication. And we really focused on what the audience needs, what the public needs, and what actually works for them. And he gave us a few pointers and said that people like direct brief information, drama and controversy, being direct, face to face. Whereas scientists, of course, are precise. They need specific data, and they can wait long periods of time. So there's a really big difference between scientists and the public. And we need to tell the stories through the public's eye, how they experience the problems, and note those questions. And that's how we can actually communicate our science to them. he was he actually really does know how to communicate with the public and with the audience. And he really gave us some very useful information. And he also said that opening the dialogue sort of face to face, or, you know, sitting with someone really brings you down. It really develops that equity. And that's when the understanding really starts. Just looking at some of his notes. And it sort of just levels the playing field. And I think Audrey just mentioned to me, I think yesterday, how Francis Collins, you know, how he actually engages a group of people and just gets through, you know, the background noise and actually captures what everyone is saying. And it's a true leadership quality. And it's obviously a great communication quality as well. And then we heard from, so that was Jive Media, and they are also working with us on the new, the updated H3Africa documentary. Then we heard from Kinje, I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, apologies, from F3Africa, and he has developed a documentary on Fragile X syndrome, and his sort of key points were, you know, you need to keep the documentary short. So he's got the 3-minute clips, multiple 3-minute clips, which just gives you the bites of information that people can sort of absorb quickly. And also there was a language issue. The language was in English, but because it's in Cameroon, they need to translate it to French. But then there was a question about, shouldn't you also, you know, develop it in the indigenous languages? But I suppose the challenge there's multiple indigenous languages, so you could get to that point, but if you needed to reach a broader audience, you need that, you know, to develop it in French first. And so those were the forms. And with Babalo's message as well with social media, I'll just pop that up. They've been tweeting from the meeting and so on. And I think it was really, you know, the messages that we constantly sharing was around scientists being very bright and having all this great information, but sitting in the corner, you know, and not sharing and not talking. And whereas you have certain loud mouths that just share bad information. So you actually just need to get out there and share the good science and the good messages. So, yep. So next steps for us is to complete the documentary, and all of you, or some of you, have been interviewed. So please avail yourselves for the interviews with Shumi. She's working really hard at that. And she's also been working very hard with the outreach group, putting the agendas together, getting people to participate. We need to decide, we didn't have a chance to talk about that, but we will decide on the frequency of the meetings and then nominating either a new chair or a co-chair. So thank you to all of those that participate regularly, and yeah, we'll continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, is there a hashtag for the main meeting tomorrow for Twitter?
There's multiple hashtags, but the one is hashtag H3Africa X Abuja 2022.
Okay, well, maybe we get, there's no blackboard. We'll figure out a way. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It has to take off, so for a little while, just briefly. So next up, we have our ethics and community engagement. Arisa Samakaki, are you ready? Good.
There's a pointer.
Yep, a pointer and a, yep.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to present the discussion we had in the Ethics and Community Engagement Working Group. My name is Arisa Samakaki from Makerere University, and I'm the current chair. Where do I face this? Okay, now what are the major achievements of the working group? For the last 8 years, we've been giving ethics guidance to the various H3Africa projects. We've conducted some limited research and quite a number of publications from the group. And we held a webinar That's in 2020, involving research ethics committee members, and they came up with some pertinent issues, and chiefly was benefit sharing, and we've written a publication out of that meeting. Then we've also developed and contributed to the development of quite a number of ethics guidance documents for H3Africa. And those are some of the guidance documents that that we've contributed to, and they're all available on the H3Africa website. We have guidelines for community engagement, informed consent, framework for African genomic biobanking, then by specimen release and material transfer agreement draft, then that one by specimen access committee guidelines, etc. All those are available on the H3Africa. Now, these are some of the publications that have come out of the working group, and so the first one, the report on commercialization. That's the one that culminated out of the work with the webinar. But it so happened that at that very time there was a discussion, okay, on commercialization. So the working group sought the services of some consultants who helped us compile that report. What are the plans for the next year? Now, it was unanimous from the meeting that we are still relevant as a working group, because we have to look at H3Africa is coming to an end. What next after H3Africa? So we would like to scale up what we are doing and transform the working group into a broader network. A broader network such as a community of practice, and also develop terms of reference for whoever will be interested, so that we continue providing continue providing ethics guidance to researchers, but also we continue building capacity and mentorship of young scientists and young ethicists. And we would also like to review the current H3Africa guidelines. Some of them are 5 years old or more. We would like to so that we are at pace with technological developments. Then we would like to conduct outreach and dissemination of the working group activities and guidelines for the scientific community. Now, we have quite a number of guidance documents, and we know that many African countries do not even have ethical regulatory frameworks, let alone guidance documents. So the thing is, we are doing a lot of work, but much of Africa does not know what we are doing. So we would like to disseminate, so that they know what we have, so that they can use the guidance documents as templates or as guidance or as benchmarks for their own guideline development. So, upcoming publications, there is a stakeholder perspective of informed consent for the use of genomic data by commercial entities. That one we've already written it, and it's been submitted. But then we would also like to write a publication on on the working group experiences and accomplishments. On that one, we are going to work on it. Then quite a number of members in the working group are conducting data on feedback of genomic results to participants, both individual and aggregate. So we would like to collect the data from the different countries, so that we can come up with one publication. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, so next up is the study coordinators, and while Sophia is coming to the mic, maybe we can load slides. Do you have slides? Okay, so if you could be loading her slides, that would be great. All right, they're up.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Sophia Ostale. I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the Study Coordinators Group. That's a picture with the picture. Okay, fine, thanks. Okay, next slide, please.
You need to hold it closer to your mouth, I think.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is me and David. We both chair the study coordinators group for a little over 2 years. We've also been affected by the COVID pandemic, but today we agreed that we're going to hand over very soon. So we're excited to do that. And we'll be supported by Rolanda, Tanyan, and Shumi. Next slide, please. So the study coordinators group, we meet once a month and we go over challenges and, okay. Okay, cool. So we have monthly meetings where we discuss different areas in our project. So the idea is to share challenges and learn from each other as we improve the studies that we work with. We have an attendance of about 8 to 12 every month. And one of the achievements that we've been able to achieve over the months, we have a monthly journal club. And one of the things is that we learn a lot from reading articles and also capacity building. So we have a lot of trainings and webinars. We invite experts to train us in different areas. As study coordinators, we need to have skills in different areas like finance and budgeting and of course, writing a manuscript. So we have selected this manuscript with which we have been working very hard over the past few months. And this manuscript is on participant adherence and across study visits across our H3Africa network. And this will be our perspective. Well, this is not too clear, but this is what we discussed today. And we focused a lot on some trainings. We had 2 trainings from invited guests. One was how to select appropriate journals to publish work. And also another key area that a lot of us wanted to learn about is how to handle reviewers' feedback. So when you submit manuscript and you get a feedback, how to respond to them. Yeah, it's not, okay. Oops, that was fast fingers, okay. Great. So just to take you through our manuscript journey, and this has been a learning process for a lot of us. We started with presentations to steering committee and putting together the tools that we need to collect our data, all the consent forms. And we developed the questionnaire, which is REDCap based. So we did that a few months ago. And one of the things is the next step is to share with the study coordinators this month and get a consent and start collecting our data. We have individuals in our team that will focus on the collection and also the analysis of this data. And then we'll start putting together the manuscript. Although we've gone a bit far with the manuscript, we've written the introduction section, methodology. So we're waiting to collect the data and analysis. And we agreed today that we should work with a timeline of September this year to finally have the first draft and submit it. So a big thank you to everyone, the amazing study coordinator group, the H3Africa Coordinating Center, and of course our funders. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. All right, so next up is education and coordinated training. So let's pull up those slides, and Pabala is already here. Hi.
Thank you for the introduction, Jennifer. I hope you can hear me through my mask. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm timing myself as well because I can speak for 2 hours non-stop. So I will make sure that I keep it under time. But I think I want to start by acknowledgements. So I've changed organizations now. I don't officially work for H3Africa anymore. I've moved to another organization, but I think my ties are still very close to H3Africa. I'm still passionate about the work that we do, the work that we've done, and the work that we will continue to do. And I want to start with acknowledgements of the whole of H3Africa, but the funders, coordinating center, but some individuals need to be mentioned. Professor Nicola Mulder, who allowed me to fly. I was able to lead committees and learn so much, and I just want to compliment you for that. Michelle Skelton, who has become a friend, I just want to thank, and the rest of the coordinating center as well, but there are other people as well that I need to thank. I'll thank you later when we're drinking wine at night. So I'm the chair of the Education Committee, and I don't work alone. I work with Fozia Rudani, who's very efficient, and there are other people that I need to mention, such as Rolanda, Julius, and Laura Poveridge, who in the background are constantly helping us to make sure that we achieve our goals. So, yes. So one of the main things that I want to say is that we've achieved a lot of things, but just to note, we may focus on fellows, but then we do training for everybody else. But in every consortium meeting, there has been training. Even currently, Rolanda, I don't know if she's here, but she's busy with the fellows. They're doing a nature masterclass on scientific writing. So whether it be online or face-to-face, we've always made sure that fellows are trained. But then we've realized then that even PIs, even professors themselves, because you never stop learning, even though you have multiple degrees, there's always something to learn. So we are constantly offering short workshops, webinars, etc., to make sure that people are trained by the committee. And there's a lot of sort of overlaps and synergies between our group and others. So it's not just about the fact that we are the education committee that needs to do the education stuff. There are other teams, and I'll speak about that now briefly, that are also making sure that they're doing training. So in today's meeting, we had welcoming introductions, some people are online, some are face-to-face. Verena Russ, who is my former colleague, and she's amazing. You should actually see some of her work. There are papers that they published, H3 Barnett, so Nikki and her team, Sean Aaron, Verena Russ, Sumi Panji, and others as well, have published on the training model that they've done and used over the years, that even before COVID, they were using a blended learning model that now the world is catching up. So please go to the H3 Barnett website, h3barnett.org, to find the resources on SOPs on how they've rolled out this model and the publications that they've done as well. We then had a great presentation from Professor Reginald Obiako, who's a previous deputy chair of the committee, by the way, and he led the committee quite well. And he was telling us about the LC and SAREN projects and about the multiple training that they've offered. So they're not a training group. They're doing SAREN and LC, which is about ethics and other things. But they've actually been very keen and key on training, and they've for the past few years made sure that they've attended and actually offered that as well. So there's been some exchanges between Americans and Nigerians and stuff like that. The other thing is that we have manuscripts in development. So we know that we're doing amazing work in terms of training, but how do we do it? What's the impact? What courses have we done? And for instance, at the moment, Foza is leading us on this. We have a paper that we're writing about the University of Washington project management course that we did in 2022. So I'm going to be writing that up because there's a quote that I've heard and I'll repeat here about until the lion learns how to write, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And as Africans, our stories have always been told by outsiders. It's important that we capture our work. It's important that we tell our stories, because there's a danger of a single story, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has said in her TED Talk. So I'll just quickly finish now. And future plans are that we are going to continue as the leadership committee to make sure that we have monthly meetings. We offer training. So we have a training course that we want to plan on mentoring and coaching for PIs later in the year. So that will happen. And the leadership is keen to kind of continue doing the work. And I just wanted to say, though, that Rolanda sends you surveys. Please read your emails and answer those surveys because they're quite important for sustainability. And I think that's what I want to leave this with. The fact that everybody in the education working group is very passionate and keen on sustainability. So we will be inviting the sustainability group to speak to us about how we can continue the work of the education committee after H3Africa officially closes. Thank you.
You had 20 more seconds, Pablo.
I am impressed with myself.
All right, next up is Biorepository. So if you can load those slides, and Elizabeth Vane is going to present for the group.
Does my 5 minutes start when the slides come up? Do I get me?
Yep, we'll work on that.
Okay, so while we're waiting for the slides to come up, my name is Elizabeth Main. I'm presenting on behalf of my peeps, Lashley and Moses. And hi, Nigeria. Nice to be here. Nice to see everybody again. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, so just to remind you who we are, we're the 3 biorepositories. We are your infrastructural resource mapping to West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. Our objective is to store high-quality nucleic acids for future research. And we have our world-class policies aligned to best practice both internationally and specifically in Africa. All right, and just to remind you, we belong to you. We're yours. You might not remember that all the time, that we do belong to you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so just to let you know what our achievements are, we have world-class facilities storing anything from ultra-low mechanical freezers to room temperature nucleic acid innovation storage. About 60% of us is grant funded and the other 40% from other sources, including fee for service. And we service researchers both inside and outside the H3Africa Consortium, published 4 manuscripts, and we have 4 in progress. And we have a significant international footprint, celebrating and representing Africa on the World Biorepository stage. We've recently been appointed as the regional ambassador for ISBA for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, chair of the African working group of ESBB, and we sit on Africa's side pole of ISBA as well. Where are we going next in the next 12 months? So we will be visiting our friends at the NIH to tell them a little bit more about what we can offer the NIH researchers. And we're planning to do an in-person presentation for the NIH in June, so very soon. Next slide. Okay, and really, I think for us, in terms of our sustainability and in terms of what we're hoping to achieve in the next 12 months, but going on into perpetuity, is continuing to maintain our biorepositories, but more importantly, to see these samples moving out of the biorepository and towards other researchers for their research. Okay, so sustainability is a work in progress. Biorepositories are not cheap. We have a lot of work in terms of licensing them to external agencies. As I said, we support projects both within and outside H3Africa. We have partnerships locally with our local governments as well as industry and academia. A lot of our work, for example, in COVID, including vaccine clinical trials, as well as validation of new testing materials, and that's been some of our IP that we've been looking at. We also offer fee-for-service training. And we've been engaging quite extensively with people who are interested in biorepositories outside of these 3. So, for example, we're looking at establishing a neurobiobank in Cape Town, and also have been working to help Zimbabwe establish its national biobank. And we also make sure that we have backups of your precious samples across the 3 biorepositories to make sure that they're always available. Got it? All right, and then just the 4 publications that I mentioned. We recently presented the abstracts of 2 of these at the ISBA conference, and these are really to look at how far we've come over the time since our initial biorepository upscale to where we are now, and that we couldn't have done it without you. So keep sending the samples if you haven't already. We love you. We love your samples. We'd like your samples to go back as well. So thanks, everyone.
Great. And then our next presentation, I believe Neil is coming in virtually to present. You got that? All right. So we'll be here in just a second. And I just want to say thank you to all our speakers so far. I believe we are now caught up on time, so great job. Everybody's kept within their 5 minutes perfectly.
Hey, can you hear me?
A little too loudly. Hold on, I gotta fix it. Try again, I think. Have you got the volume down?
Hello, can you hear me?
Still a little too loud.
Mic testing, 1, 2, 3.
Much better. Getting better. Okay.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Ananya Chaudhary. I'm based at SBIMB South Africa, and I and Neil Hanchard are co-chairs of the Genome Analysis Working Group. And we are really sorry that we missed this wonderful event, but I will try to give you a brief overview of what we discussed this morning. So, so Genome Analysis Working Group currently is kind of more like we are looking at a number of projects, and we discussed their progress and their problems in the last 6 months. So the first is definitely our whole genome sequence study, which we are calling Agenda Assessing Genomic Diversity in Africa study. And so this is aimed at sequencing over 1,000 genomes to get a better representation of African geography and ethno-linguistic groups. And so in this study, we have made a lot of progress, and we met a lot of collaborators and getting the paperwork and ethics sorted. And then the next study we talked about was the transcriptome study. IBRA reported it. And then again, here we have made a lot of progress in terms of contacting some special international collaborators as well as accessing data. And then we talked about the triplet repeat and HLA studies, which are based on the last round of whole genome sequences. Both of these studies are really progressing. And then I think we also discussed about the data availability, because as Genome Analysis Working Group, we always get these questions about when and where can we get the data. So Nikki reported that, sorry, is it my feedback? Am I hearing, or someone is trying to say something?
I think it's just yours. Keep going.
Perfect. So I think, so Nikki reported that the joint call BCFs are already at ETA, the beacon is up and running, and the frequencies have been calculated and some increments are being requested. So Nikki will do a demo, I think, tomorrow. So maybe look at that. Then there were 2 studies which were not working very well. So we also discussed them, and we found that there might be ways to salvage our chip database PopGen study, which is aimed at analyzing genotype data from all the H3Africa participants, some population genetic insights. So these were the main issues that were discussed. And then I think, like all working groups, we were looking at where do we go from here, and what is the possible role of this working group in future, and how do we meet? Is there a chance for our sustainability as an independent body? And I think we got a really engaging discussion there. And I think the overwhelming decision was to continue. So we are not giving up right now. So the plan was to continue as Genome Analysis Working Group for now, but maybe in future we might get a new entity. And then I think we got wonderful suggestions about how we can survive. So it could be an NGO model, it could be folding into some other H3 entities or DSI groups. And I think Jennifer provided us a nice idea that we could also look for some kind of fundings in terms of analyzing data and generating data to kind of keep us floating. And then after all these discussions, we formed a subcommittee who would really weigh on all this and garner all the views. So Segun was charged with the difficult responsibility of running this. And then there were discussions about whether this should be restricted to H3Africa groups only, or should we seek wider participation? And then again, I think the decision was that we are, in principle, very happy to have a wider participation, but then there are a lot of nuances that needs to be sorted. So we will move into it slowly. And then we will continue to have regular meetings, probably monthly or bi-monthly, and then try to have satellite meetings either at African Society or the International Congress of Human Genetics to meet face-to-face and keep the discussions going. And in the end, we had a very long discussion about authorships in future projects. Some of the members raised their opinion and views, which were really valuable. And we plan to compile a document and share it with steering committee and other group to kind of see what the views are around. So thank you everyone for your patience, and thanks.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So now I think we come to what every single working group has discussed in some way or another and wants to hear what the sustainability group is doing. I don't know if Mama or Ocean is presenting. Abuja. It's really great to see everybody. I agree. While my slides are coming up, it's really exciting. I mean, the difference in our lives, maybe 2 or 3 years back when we had this meeting and we knew that the project was coming to an end. I think people were feeling a little down, and all the presentation today is about how we're going to move forward, and it's really very positive atmosphere, and I really love that. It may have something to do with the picture, but that's great. Okay, guys, am I going to have my slides on? Yeah, lovely faces, I know. Okay, that's the confidence, feeling confident. Okay. Our group was really, oh yeah. Slides, guys. Sustainability slides, anybody? Yes, this is the last one. We were doing so well. It's because it's illusion. So really excited to see that everybody in their presentations for the working group had something about the sustainability. So that's really great. We're all moving forward together. We really want to thank everybody that has contributed, and we really want to thank our funders as well, because they were passionately in the middle of the discussions about sustainability. And they H3Africa family. You want me to sing or something? Do I not work the slides? Yes, happy Francis. Okay, so why don't we bring Phenotype up, because they're ready to go on their slides, and they'll come back, and we're looking forward to it. Yeah, it's like I do something. I apologize to Phenotype because you're running the rest of it. So, thinking about the Phenotype organization or given, our teams can be split into 2 rounds. During the first round, our focus was really to try and get H3Africa to collect all the same types of data and do it in the same manner. While in the second round, our aim was to provide H3Africa with the resources to allow them to do data analyzation. So one of our biggest aims during the first round was establishing the core phenotypes. So this was a set of agreed upon phenotypes by H3Africa that all H3Africa projects were to collect. And we're happy to say that the majority of the H3Africa projects have actually collected these phenotypes. Then, in addition to that, we also, we also established the standard CRF, which majority of the H3Africa second-round projects have implemented. Then after that, we adapted the standard CRF
to also allow application in pediatric participants. Okay, so then in addition to that, we expanded our work to include domain-specific modules that extended all our data collection tools to specific domains that are captured within H3Africa. And all of these came with guidelines that we developed as well as mapped to ontologies to increase interoperability. One of the achievements that we're really proud of as well is working with a lot of the other working groups within H3Africa. In some way, shape, or form, we were involved in many of these working group activities. With the CVD working group, we helped develop the chain resource. In the mental health working group, we helped develop the harmonization proposal. As Vogue mentioned, in the microbiome working group, we helped develop the data template. And we've also worked with other groups such as Seneca and Sickle in Africa. Then we also have cataloged most of H3Africa's project metadata, phenotype descriptors, and consent, and also developed the African population ontology. So in our session, we had a minor report back recently on our recent data harmonization workshop, which is really the culmination of all our work within the Phenotype Harmonization Working Group. And these were some of the topics that we were covering, and we had experts from many different groups across the world providing feedback. So please look forward for materials and presentations of this session, as it will be very useful for any phenotype harmonization efforts that you are expected to undergo in the future. In terms of publications, we are working on 3 papers. Not all of them are publications. The first one is a H3Africa white paper in which we're publishing the development of the standard CRF as well as all of the modules that we've developed, and that will be shared with all the people that were developed in that process. We're also working on a review where we're trying to combine all of the lessons that we've learned across working with different working groups across our efforts, and just sharing what we've learned over the last 10 years. And then one of the big resources that we're working on is the Phenotype Harmonization Guideline, which we hope will serve as a very valuable resource for the community in terms of moving forward with harmonization, both prospective and retrospective. I'm going to skip this slide. So in terms of upcoming plans and leadership, we discussed 3 avenues. I wasn't sure how this would turn out, but we had a pretty active group actually. And ultimately, we discussed each of these options, whether it's time to, in the working group where we're at, whether we want to pursue much bigger goals, such as an avenue 2. But then I think with the help of our group and the discussions, we settled on avenue 1. So essentially within the next year, we will focus on restructuring the focus of our working group, and it will become an outreach and education working group with specific focus on phenotype harmonization, the resources that we've developed and how people can use them. So with that in mind, we will continue with our current leadership, but we will also be looking to pursue some H3Africa leadership as well and join in with some other working groups to get some volunteers for that. Yeah, some of the members, not all of the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lyndon, and thank you for jumping in. Do we have the sustainability slides ready to go? All right, let's try this again, Leslie. Round 2.
Due to popular demand, I'm back. So thank you all. The Sustainability Working Group, I co-chair this group with Demo, my very good friend there, who kinds of bring calm and sensibility to the group. Today we were really a large group. It was a very robust discussion, and there were 27 participants. Our agenda was quite broad. Next slide, please. Maybe I can do it here. Yeah, so a lot of what we discuss is really to create the umbrella. If you can think of us as an umbrella group that is kind of marketing what H3Africa has done and how we can move collectively forward together. So we discussed, there was a lot of discussion about some of the documents that we've put together to showcase what we have within H3Africa. So we've got sequencing capabilities, we've got resources about core and infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We also have a draft manuscripts in terms of how has all of those infrastructure that has been established in H3Africa. We're talking about the H3 Bionet, how to manage data and all of that. We're talking about the biorepositories. We're talking about the human resources, the bioinformatics, all those huge resources we've had within the continent. And using COVID-19 as an example, how has all of these resources moved forward in terms of supporting the continent when it was facing such a challenge. So that's an example, but that's also something that should move forward. As we move forward and we create this umbrella where all of us can feel comfortable working in, it's also important to put together a constitution document. And we're really grateful to Demois and Michelle Ramsey, who have really worked tirelessly on this document and have made it available. So we're at a stage now where that document can be finalized and shared with all of you, because we really see all of the efforts that are going up being captured really nicely under this document. We talked a little bit about how do we as a group want to interact with pharma. Obviously what we're doing is for the good of the bigger population, and some of the things that we'll do will also require being commercialized. So we want to do it in a very responsive way. What are our relationships with our funders? We love them so much. We want to stay in touch, and we have a few ideas on how to do that. And the next steps in terms of, okay, we have a draft consortium constitution, a document. It may not be perfect, but is it good enough for us to kind of approve it and start testing our future with it? So next slide, please. Listen to me. So the constitution document, I thought I would go into it in a little bit of details, but the document just summarizes it, and we have circulated this in the last year or so. We're looking at an umbrella organization. It could be a non-governmental organization. We love the name H3Africa, so it's going to be termed H3Africa Consortium. So we want to move forward as an H3Africa Consortium. You know, the document states the vision and the fact that any group that we bring together to oversee this document must understand the vision of H3Africa, so that we have the best model. So we're going to be talking to a few people. Somebody suggested AfriHealth that has that kind of umbrella organization. The objectives looks at ethics framework, community engagement, and the resources that we have. We think the membership should be for H3Africa members, but we should also have affiliates. And we think that our sponsors fit very well as Friends of Africa. So we want to continue, like I told you, continue to interact. It's going to have a document with governance, steering committee, membership, and we're already proposing that it may cost about $100 per institution per year to have that membership, because we obviously need some funding to continue. And I've got a few more slides in terms of some. This is not working. Next slide. We talked a little bit about pharma engagement, and we want to make sure that it maintains the open data sharing and sample policy that H3Africa does. So to build on that, I already talk about the facts that we want to continue as with our funders, and they may be members of the steering committee, but as observers. Next slide, please. In terms of, I think we've talked about this. Next slide. So what do we have for next steps? Obviously, there will be some discussion at the steering committee meeting in terms of how we continue forward as a working group or as a bigger group that's talking together. And hopefully, Nikki's presentation would also give an example of how we can continue in terms of our data storage plan and all of that. I believe that's the last slide, but you can hit the next button just to be sure. Yes. Thank you all for your time.
All right, thank you, everybody. And despite everybody doing a great job of keeping on time, we are a little tiny bit behind, but I feel like if anybody has a burning question, we ought to allow it for any of the working group chairs. If not, you can catch up with them during the rest of the meeting. All right, very nice job. It's wonderful to see all the progress that's been made and all the enthusiasm to keep going. So great. All right, so I'm not actually Ebony Madden, I'm Jennifer Troyer, but I'm taking your place here to present on a session we did this morning. And I'm gonna try and do this without slides because what we wanna be doing is continuing a discussion that, as Michelle said, actually started maybe at our last in-person meeting around how we what responsibility we bear to the populations we work with and study to make sure that there is benefit to the work that we do and that it is shared responsibly and with common understanding of how we are going to talk about it. And so, as I said, this is a conversation that started here in the consortium. How do we respectfully and responsibly describe populations and allele frequencies within populations and talk about groups of people, however you want to group them. But it's also a conversation that's going on internationally. And so it's kind of now at this point collided with this other effort that was commissioned actually by the Human Genome Research Institute at the National Institutes of Health, along with a couple of other institute centers there, to our National Academies of Medicine to get a report on how we use population descriptors in genomics research. And so I'm going to read these questions before I talk about our session this morning. And I want you all to be thinking about these questions because then when I'm done telling you what we said this morning, I want you all to add to it. All right. So here are the questions. What ways are there to describe people that are relevant to genomics research? How do you identify yourself? How do you think that should be incorporated into genetics research studies? How are population descriptors such as race, ethnicity, and ancestry being used or not used effectively in genomics research? What population descriptors, if any, should be used in genomics research or should not be used in genomics research? Do all genetic studies need specific population or individual descriptors of their study subjects? What aspects of the current use of population descriptors in genomics research needs to be changed or improved? How should population descriptors be used in genomics research moving forward? What ways do we categorize the participants in our own research? What words do we use? Do these align with what these communities call themselves? What are the most effective ways to ensure that the communities and their voices are heard? And does anybody have positive examples of research and communities working together on these topics? And finally, we want you especially to think about, so these are questions, as I said, that are arising globally. Are there African-specific, country-specific concerns in this space? Or are these concerns and solutions going to be completely universal or very local? So those are the questions, and I'll read them again at the end too. What did we do this morning? So this morning we talked about just exactly what I just said, that little history of these conversations going on sort of throughout the genomics community. I think with the acknowledgement that these issues this has not always been done responsibly, right? And there has been harm done. And so we have to make sure that as we move forward, we're making sure that genomics is beneficial to all communities. And we had a video recording from Vince Bonham, who's at the Human Genome Research Institute. He is our deputy director, and he heads the TIDE office, which is training, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And he talked about NHGRI's new commitments. We've always tried this, but now it's in writing, to workforce diversity, inclusive science, and health equity. And then we had a guest speaker from the Center for African Studies in Switzerland, Henri Michel Yuri. I hope I said that right. I'm not a French speaker. And he gave us, as historians, perspective on these issues, and talked about race as a constructed identity that is political, cultural, and social, and has several influences in Africa that are perhaps very interesting to all of us and unique to the African continent, but perhaps not. So, but there's a strong history of colonialism that influences all of these questions. Was a strong influence from Christian missionaries, and then migration patterns, both voluntary migration and involuntary migration. And so that gives us this complex historical tapestry on which we should be thinking about the meaning of genomics research. So then, after that, we had a little icebreaker. And I have to say, for all of you who are in this room, who are in that room, thank you. It went wonderfully. Everybody participated. Everybody was engaged. Everybody was respectful in their conversation. Everybody really thought hard about these issues. But the first thing we did was talk to each other about how we identified ourselves. What did we think of in terms of our ancestry, our ethnicity, our culture, and how we thought that mattered. And so then after that, we did some breakout groups, and each group chose one of those questions that I read earlier to talk about, and then reported back. And so I'm going to read you what I took from that report back, and then I'm going to ask anybody who was in that room to add to that anything that I missed. And then we're going to ask everybody else to join in this conversation for a little bit. All right. So the first group reported back that they really thought a lot about this interface of social constructs and genetics. And that really there's a triangle between genetics, social, and environment, which are all really connected, can influence each other. And then other groups added on to that, thinking not only about genetics in terms of genome variation, but also epigenetics, expression data, et cetera. All of this has influences from this triangle of genetics, social, and environment. And then another group raised the point that without any descriptors, it's actually really hard to describe our genomic data. Like, how do we put it in context? How do we make it meaningful if we're not talking about who it applies to and who it's meaningful for? And at the same time, there was this counterbalancing point that descriptors are always going to be imperfect at best, and sometimes completely meaningless, because often we're mixes of so many different things that no one descriptor is going to fit, and in fact could cause misinterpretations. So, and certainly is confounding because of these questions of history and migration and admixture. So, and then if you are going to group, how many subgroups do you go to? What level of granularity do you have to get to? And at what point does that granularity make it all meaningless anyway, and you could just have us all be people? And so there was a suggestion of sort of thinking about all these different levels and doing analysis at multiple levels at larger groups, and then smaller and smaller and smaller, and letting the data tell you where it's important and where it matters. Let's see. Another big question that came up about these descriptors is standardization. How do you allow enough flexibility that people can use their own terms and yet standardize it enough that, and so ontologies are one way, but enough so that you can pull the data together and use it all. And then there was the acknowledgement that history, some of it quite negative, has influenced our descriptors and has connotations with those descriptors that are carried with it, like baggage. And so do we need to actually develop new descriptors and not use the ones that we've historically used? And then thoughts about not only should we be describing populations, but several other, we don't have standardized descriptors for environment, for language, for culture, for language, for location or genealogy. And that all of these should be considered along with genomes and health, and are going to interact and be complicating. And then there were some interesting points raised about other potential trait modifiers that may be related to genomics, may influence genomics, may influence health or how you interact with your healthcare system, that might also be important. And so some of these are things we might consider character traits, like introvert or stubbornness, risk-taking. Others have, we think, biological components, but are complicating, like being on the autism spectrum or being alcoholic. And so how do you bring those kinds of descriptors in, and where do they matter? And then finally, another issue that was raised was reporting. So how do we report to the general public and then back to communities and then back to individuals in ways that really are meaningful, are not stigmatizing, and really acknowledge that with genomics, it has impact for an individual, but also a collective. And so how do you do both those things, the individual feedback and the collective feedback? That's what I have written down. Did I miss anything, or does anybody want to add anything?
Maybe just concerns, individual concerns and collective group concerns.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So with that question of what's important to report back, individual and collective, but also what's important to consent to start out with, when the results from an individual might reflect on the collective.
Thanks. I think it's very much related. My comment is very much related to that last comment, where side of the EDI coin might be sovereignty, particularly with some communities which I speak to, or tribal leaders that actually are very strong, have strong views on EDI. They say, actually, we don't want your eye, we want sovereignty. And so that can relate to ownership, particularly when we start thinking about genomes as well, and or parts of genomes. It's a challenging point, and I don't know if others have thought about it.
Yeah, no, that is a challenging point and a good one. I'm going to ask, will you be my mic runner again? Do you mind running the mic again? Great. All right. Anybody else, especially those of you in the back, we want to hear your thoughts. Everybody's tired. Oh, wait, we got one.
Thank you. It's an interesting subject, complex. And I want to answer it by posing a question to say, I want to answer it by posing a question to say, in the studies that were done, let's say across the H3Africa, what were the people saying they want to be called? Did we ever take that into account? Not what we wanted to call them or what we thought they are. That also could help us really define how we can move with the subject. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think it's something that some of the other discussions we're getting at too is how are you doing this in a way that you're working with the communities and they're involved in these decisions, and you're not just labeling, you're letting people identify themselves. Does anybody who is collecting any sort of demographic data want to say how they deal with this particular issue and whether they're putting labels or having people identify themselves? Or anybody want to talk about the challenges of working with self-identification data?
Thank you. These are really very, very obviously complex questions, and we actually, in our H3 studies, just call people that they were West Africans from Ghana and Nigeria. So completely calculation.
And I think that's a common solution, and then the question is how informative is that solution as well. There's one in the back. No one here. I think it's Elizabeth and then Michelle.
So I just wanted to talk about the thorny issue of people of mixed heritage, because that seems to be something where actually it's not even on the population basis. It's on the individual basis as to whether people identify one way or the other. So we had a very small study that was run in one of our hospitals in Johannesburg, looking at mainly mixed heritage population and looking for genes that were predictive of celiac disease. And it became a big problem because a lot of people were self-identifying as Black rather than mixed race. But then obviously they're coming up with DQ2 and DQ8 quite strongly, and symptoms of celiac disease. And again, within the same family, people identify differently. So the mother sometimes identified as Caucasian, the father might identify as Black, and the children might both identify as mixed race. So I think it becomes quite difficult, even on a population basis, to decide what people should or shouldn't be identified as.
Michelle, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you very much. So I can just tell you our experience and what we've done and how we use that, because sometimes you actually collect the data, but you don't use it. So we have asked for ethnicity and language, but we've done so for the individual, but then asked them also to tell us what their father and mother and grandparents were, which has been very interesting. And in the study that we did in the South African component, we used that information to look at the data. So first, when we pulled everybody together, you sort of see a cloud in terms of principal components, and you see an inkling that there may be 3 groups showing population substructure. But then when you take everybody out who has told you that they have different ancestries in their parents and grandparents, you kind of see very clear groups emerging. So I think it's interesting to look at it, and we've published this. We've had some comments, from journalists. I expected that we would have more of a sort of a response, but we didn't. And maybe we need to make that information more widely known. But I think at the end of the day, we do need to ask people about how they self-report, because that is how we get their opinion. So maybe to speak to Colette's question, we do ask them, how do you self-report? But then once you do the genetic analysis and you cluster people, sometimes they don't fall within the groups that they self-identify with. So how do you include this then in the analysis? So I think there's some really interesting things to think about. Thank you.
Well, we'll go to you in just a second. I just want to respond that in the discussion this morning, this kind of question of what if somebody's self-reporting something different than their genomics is showing, and the idea being that both the genomics and the culture and the identification could all be important and valuable information for understanding this person and their place in health. Yes.
So I can share one similar experience with Michelle. It's set in a beautiful way. If I want to break that down, for example, I would be classified as an African, but I think I'm a Nigerian. So if when that come to the Yoruba, say I'm from this particular place, and people tend to mix together tribe and the ethnicity, and also self-identify themselves in a different way. So in one story that we are doing in Nigeria correctly, so we had the same experience as what Michelle was saying. So in Nigeria, for example, people say that there are about 300 ethnic groups in Nigeria. But when you collect a sample and you look at the PCA, you don't see 300 ethnic group. Yeah, because people tend to, but it's very difficult to report something like that. People have said that I'm from this particular ethnic group, but you don't see a cluster in that particular ethnic group, because you just see everybody cluster together as Yorubas. You don't see different ethnic group maybe between Yoruba. So I think that kind of, if you want to publish paper, it's difficult to say that you are not actually who you say you are. But I don't know how you can report that, say that you're not actually what you say you are, because people tend to have different ethnic groups. So it's really need to be very clear on self-reported ethnic group and what the genetic is telling us.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's Colette again. Very interesting from the last speaker. Thank you. I think the aspect of reporting about no differences in the ethnic groups, it is what it is. So what you must report, because we have got a tendency, scientists and researchers, to want to see differences. We want to say if there are different ethnic groups, so they must be different genetically. There are certain ethnic groups that are not different genetically. Yes, that is what they are. So we can report actually and say, we don't find any genetic differences in these ethnic groups. So the separation could be just people wanting to identify differently, but the underlying genetics is the same. So I think part of our thing is to accept what we find and possibly solidify, like you saying, we might not have 300 ethnic groups. Perfect, but in terms of the ethnic identification of the people, that's okay. I think we need to move from that paradigm of diffusing what is there and then accepting and sometimes solidifying some of the evidence in the field. Thank you.
All right. So I think, Michelle, one last quick comment, and then we've got to move along. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. So just to say, also when we study groups that are in deep rural areas versus those in urban centers, we see many differences, because we see in the urban centers now this melting pot, and it's kind of sometimes loss of identity or multiple identities is maybe more what we're seeing. So this is like a new thing for us to start looking at and thinking about.
Yeah, so that intersection of social, cultural, ethnic, environmental, and genomic. So I hope that these discussions will continue over the course of the days, but I do want to tell you that if you're interested in contributing to the NASM survey and want to give your opinion, they have a request for comment open through a couple days from now, June 1st. So I'm going to ask Francis to help me send around that link again. It has many of these questions that I read out to you are actually in that survey, and you're free to put in as much or as little information as you want. So anybody that's interested can contribute to that. And now I'm going to put on my glasses so I can read who's coming up next. So we're going to hear about the Human Cell Atlas from Alex. Is that right? Okay. Is it a recording? Oh, he's online.
I'm on, as long as you can hear me.
Sorry for the delay.
No worries at all, and thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I could do this. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I had a recording. I was worried that I was going to have to watch my son because my partner unfortunately got COVID, but just recovered. I hope you all are staying safe and well. And so, can you all see my slides and can you hear me fine? If you can nod in the room, that'd be great. Perfect. Thank you for the exaggerated head nod. You're awesome. So I appreciate the opportunity to briefly tell you a little about some of the work that we've been doing in the Human Cell Atlas with respect to equity. We spoke to you last year, and I wanted to sort of give you an update on what we've been doing and talk to you about what our future plans are to figure out how we could better engage with researchers across the continent. And I'm speaking as one of the co-leaders of the Human Cell Atlas, or HCA Equity Working Group, which I helped direct along with Musa and Partha. And please feel free to reach out to any of us. So as background for those who are unfamiliar with the HCA, what the HCA is fundamentally all about is trying to create a comprehensive reference map of the types and properties of all the cells in our bodies so that we can better understand, diagnose, monitor, and treat disease. And, you know, I think that this is a maybe hard thing to think about. For me, the simplest way to think about it, having been trained as a chemist and a physicist, is to say that basically what we want a periodic table of the different cell types of our body. We want to understand what different cell types exist in what different locations, what are the deviations that occur in disease, and how some of the factors that you were just talking about, like genetic diversity, environmental exposure, lived experiences, contribute to alterations that may either lead to improved health or may influence disease. So the HCA is a relatively young organization. It actually only got kicked off about I guess, 6 years ago in 2016 with a meeting at the Welcome. And since there have been a series of different activities to try and get things going, ranging from meetings focused on technology to ones that sort of moved into computation, and then getting into regional and equity workshops. And most recently, actually, there was the first of the HCA meetings that was held in Africa for the HCA Africa Regional Network. And hopefully some of you were able to attend this. It was led by Gordon, Christian, Thumbi, Alfred, Musa, and Nikki. And in case you weren't, but you're interested, actually all of the videos from the event are available up online, and I would encourage you to go look at them to see what happened. But if you couldn't make it, hopefully this will be just the first of many, and so you'll have the opportunity to join in the future. So the HCA, unlike a lot of organizations, is actually grassroots. It's totally led by researchers from all around the globe. It's people that are interested in the idea of understanding the cellular basis of disease and working together to define it. You know, in terms of who's registered, there's over 1,300 members from, over 2,400 members from 1,300 different institutes, spanning 83 different countries, including a number of individuals and countries within Africa. And whereas this started really as a small network from a number of labs that were interested in doing this within, say, North America and Europe, it quickly expanded into a global effort by the establishment of different regional networks. So first HCA Asia, which has over 400 members and a number of countries involved. Then HCA Latin America, which got rolling just before COVID, and where we now have a number of members, and this is actually out of date. There's well over 100. And more recently, the establishment of HCA Africa, where at least in terms of who signed up, there are about 44 members and 12 countries represented. And this is a good start, but we obviously want to do better and engage more researchers on the continent. So the HCA fundamentally has organized itself into different tissues. I don't want to go through each of these. I only want to put it up briefly so that, because this is recorded, if you're interested in a particular network, like how genetic diversity plays into cellular features, you could contact, for example, Cheyenne, Sarah, or Jimmy. Or if you were particularly interested in something like the lung or the liver, you could get the names of the individuals in the email list of interest. And so the HCA is putting out these publicly available resources that anybody can interact with and download. And so a number of atlases, as they've been called, or cellular maps have been generated. At this point, there's over 8,000 individuals represented, hundreds of thousands of samples, and millions of cells. And whereas this really is thinking first about creating a healthy reference, there has been an increasing effort within the community to make matched atlases of disease. For example, in the context of COVID-19, there are about 10 million cells representing multiple different tissues. And so just to give you a sense of what's out there, if you were interested in the gut, for example, there are about 4 million cells spanning, about 400 individuals and about 1,000 samples, and more on the way. And many places where you can contextualize, for example, what happens in a disease like COVID-19. And whereas the HCA is really focused on creating a healthy human cell atlas, it's always been viewed as a partner to sort of disease cell atlases. And so many of us, and myself included, spend a lot of time actually working on disease as opposed to health. We're much more interested in global maladies and trying to help understand the cellular basis of them. And there are dedicated funders on both sides. On the HCA, many people that are interested in the fundamental reference, and then many others that are interested in trying to create the disease references to understand what we're trying to prepare. So with that background, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to quickly tell you about what the HCA Equity Group has been doing, because we really believe in this idea of equity in action. And so I want to tell you about some of the things we've been doing and some of the things we have going forward. So briefly, the Equity Working Group is really focused on trying to promote and support equity. It wants to make sure that we create atlases that are representative of many of the factors you were just discussing: biological sex, ages, ethnicities, geographies, socioeconomic statuses. But we're really interested not just in making sure that it's representative, but making sure that we have equitable participation, that scientists all around the globe are engaged in doing this work at all levels of training, and that we promote equal benefit from the data coming from this. And so what the Equity Working Group is really trying to do is to empower and engage people through education, outreach, and training. We're working on outreach programs, particularly to underrepresented communities, working on tracking and monitoring diversity, because those are things that if they matter to you, you track them and you monitor them. We're working with funders to get earmarking of funds to get people engaged in this work and help do some training, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And we've been planning and leading workshops, either remote or in person, to help people learn some of the technologies and computational methods that underlie the HCA. And here, for example, is a picture of us doing this in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So since the last time we spoke to you, one of the big success stories that I think of is the HCA Africa Regional Network. As I mentioned, there was an HCA Africa Symposium. It was virtual, given COVID, that happened in March 21, 2022 of this year. And it brought together 136 unique viewers from 24 countries. And, it got very good reviews from people. And one of the best reviews that we got was that where somebody said, "Thank you for finally making this happen. Let's keep it going on a consistent basis. There's no excuse." And I totally agree with that. In parallel, there have been regional networks that have been happening in the other places in Latin America. The last Latin American meeting brought over 400 individuals together, and there'll be an upcoming HCA Asia Symposium that also, previously brought together over 400 individuals. And I'll say that both of those started in their first meetings with more like 40 people. So the fact that there's already 136 people from the continent that were interested in getting engaged in this work, I think, is a very promising sign. So rather than just talking about the HCA, we've been very interested in trying to help enable people to use these methods, both experimentally and computationally. On one hand, we want to teach people how to use the various experimental protocols so they can apply it to their own research. regardless of whether that contributes to the HCA, because there are many places where these technologies are empowering. And on the other side, you can begin to do computational work with existing data. And so we're trying to enable people to do that. So with support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we've started doing a series of workshops and outreach programs. For example, we recently did a data analysis workshop in Latin America that ran for about 2 weeks. We had over 400 participants from 24 countries, and people really appreciate the opportunity to get together to problem solve around shared technologies, to learn from one another. And we thought it was a very good model for things that we could do on the continent going forward. Similarly, during COVID, we did a virtual training in India and Pakistan that brought together over 220 participants out of over 900 that applied, where we created a series of short talks and lectures, actually did videos and hands-on demonstrations and some experimental work, and then walked people through computational methods along with Q&A. And that was led by a series of individuals, both on the ground from NIBMG, but also a number of individuals from my team in the surrounding area. What I want to come here today to tell you about is the fact that we actually have some upcoming plans for additional workshops. There'll be an introductory single-cell analysis workshop, which we're planning for September. So if you're interested, please reach out. I'd love to tell you about it and get your thoughts on what we should include. And we're hoping to follow that up with a second workshop that'll be a few months later, once the researchers have had the opportunity to engage with the material a little bit, where hopefully we'll get both an experimental and a computational component. And over the next few years, we have funding to do a number of outreach symposiums to different communities to talk about the methods, the data, how it can be applied, but also to do some computational training and some in-person workshops. And so if you're interested in having us come and work with you on this, we'd love to have a conversation with you about it. The other thing I'll say that we've done is we've tried to really create more resources for the community. Spent a lot of time starting to curate and pull together resources for the HCA and put it on the website, but we're trying to add more meat as we go through. And these symposiums that we're recording are a good way of doing that because we can add the resources. We've also been trying to use things like COVID to explain why the HCA is so useful. And we can talk about contexts that might be of particular interest or relevance to your communities as well, beyond COVID. And we've also been thinking about how to engage people that aren't scientists, talking about what we as an HCA really want to do. And so we recently submitted a correspondence describing what our goals are in the HCA and how we want to benefit humanity, and trying to not put too much scientific jargon on some of our goals and really make some of the concepts a little bit more accessible and say where we stand. We'd love feedback on that. If there are things that you really like or things that you don't like, let us know. These are all living documents. And what we're trying to do is to engage and address equity early and to partner with people to do it as well as possible. And so with that, I'll just say thank you for your time and partnership. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm always delighted to chat about this stuff, including the many topics that came up during the previous conversation that I had the opportunity to listen to. My email is shalik@MIT. Please reach out anytime, and hopefully I'll get to engage with many of you that I haven't already, either remotely or in person in the not too distant future. Thanks again for the opportunity to present.
Does anybody have a question for Alex about HCA? All right, Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much. That was great. If you have any announcements.
Yes. So thanks to all the speakers in the session. We will go to a break now for most of the folks, and the PIs will join in the Kaduna boardroom for a PI meeting. The IEC will join 20 minutes later, and then the funders. And then we will have a welcome reception in this room at 8. Hopefully they'll turn the room around in time. So we'll see you there. Thank you. Thank you.